Kayem, salam bro, how you doing?
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank y'all for having me.
That was the full version of the salam that Hasnain said that he was going to use all the time to be more respectful, right? Hasnain, do you want to give
Yeah,
us the
man.
backstory on that before we
Listen,
start?
the backstory on that is just I just wanted to be a better person, and I forgot where I was, but I was in the city, and I was walking past the mosque, and I was like, let me go pray. And so I said salam to a guy, and he literally just stopped in his track and said, "Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah." And I'm like, you know what, dude, I think this is like just like a revelation to me. I just gotta start saying the full version this whole time. So ever since then, and I will say people get pissed off when I say the whole thing. Like even when I text message people, it's the whole thing. Even when I call people, it's the whole thing. And like when you call somebody to like get to the point, but they have to stop because I'm like assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Like, bro, what do you want? So people get
Hasnain,
upset with me. But listen, I'm trying to go to heaven, man.
Hasnain, you're inspiration to all of us, bro.
I know, man.
Kayem, brother, I want to appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining us. We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate you taking from your time. And inshallah, hopefully on this episode, we'll be discussing, your art, your story, and its connection to activism. Just going through your bio, I feel like you're very, to be honest with you, just to be straight up with you, very inspiring figure. I can't wait to get into the
Yeah.
delicacies of your art and your character and what kind of drives you. Just before we start, can you just walk us through what you're working on now? No, you mentioned that you're working on some new music and you wanted to push back the episode to discuss that. Can you walk us through what you're working on now and what we can expect to see from you in the near future?
Yeah, long story short, and by the way, the pleasure is absolutely all mine to be on here and share space with you guys. I haven't actually released music literally in years. I had a, flourishing career previously using a different name, and I ended up getting put on the no-fly list and facing perpetual FBI detainment, surveillance, harassment. And it took me off. I couldn't really do anything publicly for a number of years. Fast forward to now, alhamdulillah, I'm all good. Name is clear. I'm getting ready for my first music release, which will be July 16th, inshallah. It's a song called Medlock Road. It's probably not the smartest first release to put out. It's not really built for streaming. It's 5 minutes long. It's a long song. It's a lot of rapping. It's not as melodic as my other stuff, but it's my story. It's basically like my autobiography in a song. So I'm looking forward to releasing that. And then we'll have the American debut in August of a documentary called Sing Freedom, which followed me on my first ever trip to Libya. My father was a political prisoner in Libya. He escaped after 5 years, lived on the run for a long time, bounced around North Africa, and helped form an opposition movement to the regime there. And eventually they moved to the States and sought asylum. And I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky, which sounds really random, but that was the home base of this community of political dissidents. So we lived our whole life in exile. So once the revolution happened there, I got to visit for the first time, and there was a film crew of 8 or 9 people that followed me around. And I finally get to share that with American audiences. I'm really looking forward to that. It'll just be consistent music. This past year and a half, I've just been locked in the studio making music, and I'm excited to finally be able to release music, release the documentary, which I think will really connect with anybody who's a child of the diaspora, and just the story of retracing your footsteps and your heritage and discovering more about yourself. So I'm excited, man.
Exciting times. Exciting times. I wanted to just kind of get into. I know you mentioned a lot there, and a lot to unpack. And I know in your biography you talk a lot about your father's story and how that kind of impacted you. Just before we get into that, people who aren't aware of like the political situation historically in Libya, and what the story is there, can you just walk us through what was happening and what kind of oppression and suppression was taking place, and what kind of work your father was doing to kind of counteract that?
Yeah, for sure, man. For people who aren't familiar, Gaddafi was placed into power in 1969 by the CIA in a bloodless coup. It's not some conspiracy stuff. These are declassified files. It's open source, and ruled for some time and with an iron fist. People outside of Libya who have never been and have kind of formed their own opinions, but ultimately this was a man who crushed any type of opposition, any type of assembly of the people, even if it had nothing to do with politics. There's a group of people in Benghazi who beautified this area that was full of trash, makeshift landfill, if you will. And it took so much time to plant trees and make it beautiful in a park. And as soon as it was done, government came and just bulldozed it to teach them a lesson. Like, don't assemble, don't do things, without our word. Other officials would come to Libya and study it and say, hey, it's hunky dory. But you get there and you're, of course, accompanied by a government official. Even people would see protests in the street and say, "Oh, they like Gaddafi. Look there in the streets." But you have to go to those protests, And not only do you have to go there, there's like an enthusiasm police. If you go to these demonstrations, not protests but rallies for the government, and you don't look enthusiastic enough, you can be put in jail just for that. People were jailed forever. I have several close friends whose family members were imprisoned, close friends who never knew if their father was alive or dead their whole life, literally until 2011 when the revolution happened and they had to go and see. This is a man who changed the Quran with his hand. He changed the word anas to anasi. He'd take out the word qul, qul huwallahu ahad. He'd be like, why do you say qul? Just say huwallahu ahad. He'd take out all the quls in the Quran. And, he spoke about our own prophet with extreme disrespect. He was just a tyrannical being, man. And it's crazy to see a lot of this revisionist history that is going on in the world right now. But, fact of the matter is he was put into place, by the United States. He had beef with the United States during Reagan era. There were sanctions against Libya. Sanctions were lifted in 2004. And since 2004, Gaddafi has been basically a puppet of the United States and, tortured Muslims on their behalf. So there's a lot of word now where you see, oh, Gaddafi was this champion and some like anti-Western, anti-imperialist dude. And he was exactly the opposite. He was an imperialist himself. And people say, oh, he wanted to unite Africa. He didn't want to unite Africa. He wanted to rule Africa. There's a big difference. He perpetuated wars in Sudan and Chad, all types of places where he'd, arm rebels, arm governments, and just wanted, to be loved by the outside world and to be feared by his people ultimately.
It's very interesting because social media, especially on social media, you'll see people from each side, right? And I've seen it where people have supported Gaddafi and they said that, oh, Libya was better with Gaddafi. You also see the same thing with other countries, like for example Iraq, right? You'll see people that said Iraq was better with Saddam, but was it? No. I mean, he tortured and he killed people, right? Same thing with other regime leaders as well. I know how I would react to people who would say the latter, because those people who say, oh, so it was better with Saddam or it was better with that, is because you benefited from that regime, right? You benefited from that individual being in power because either you're a relative or you were feeding off the wealth that they were taken from it. How do you respond to situations like that? And before that, I'll give an example. People would say, I'm not Iraqi, by the way, but like people would say Iraq was better off with Saddam. But I'm gonna be like, I respond to them. It's like, all right, so you're telling me that, issuing chemical weapons on the Kurds or marginalizing the majority sect within that religion and within that region and killing those people and having squads go out and kill people and enticing a war with a different country and all this and all that and thinking that Islamically you're above everybody else. For me, it didn't fly well, so I had obviously my rebuttals, and not just in Iraq and in Pakistan and in other countries as well. How do you respond to that?
Well, I would first rewind to the whole both sides thing and say in Libya specifically, there's not really a both sides. Like anybody who argues pro Gaddafi, they can't tell me. I'll invite either of you right now to tell me that personally a Libyan who's pro Gaddafi. The country was united against this regime. So we didn't really have a history of sectarian violence and, anything like that. So I'll take it even a step further. But, it comes from a sense of arrogance for you to be able to tell other people about their experiences, with their leaders. And I learned that personally just because Gaddafi that was a situation that I was personally in tune with. And my family didn't move to America like other immigrants. They didn't come to stay. We always thought we were going back next year, the year after. We were like actively trying to change the regime there. So we always thought we were moving back. We were in tune. So with that said, I knew about the situation intimately, and I would watch the news or listen to academics and their takes on Libya. And I was like, yo, this is inaccurate. And what it did for me was it really humbled me and made me question and second guess some of my opinions about other world leaders. I would find myself gravitating to certain world leaders because I thought they're anti, they stood up to America or something. And I realized, I don't know a damn thing about this person or that person. I just realized that I don't. And when you look at the situation that Libya is in today, to say it was better under Gaddafi, first of all, is the wrong question. You're not saying is it better or is it worse? The man was evil. That's period.
Right.
Part of the reason it's in the shape that it's in is because of Gaddafi. We had no institutions. There wasn't even a constitution. There's a big void. And what happened is, unfortunately, other largely Muslim countries like Egypt and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates conspired together to prop up warlords. And, people had their own proxy wars inside of Libya. And that's just how it turned out. But you cannot have revisionist history and prop up somebody because of a current state. And to give you an example, Palestine is currently occupied by Israel. We feel that they're unjustly occupied, and we would love for them to be free. Hypothetically, let's say that somehow they were not occupied anymore. Israel did not continue to occupy them, and Palestine did not have institutions. And there were different factions of Palestinians who faced off against one another, different countries in the world that supported this side or that side. And you'd lose electricity sometimes, or you'd have, some of these complaints that we see about Libya, that you lose electricity or whatever the case is, whatever gets out of hand. You can't retroactively say, oh, it was better when Israel occupied us. Just on principle and morals, that was incorrect. Whatever happens after that is gone, it could go this way or that way. But, I used this as an example before. Is if you had a group of enslaved people who rebelled against a slave master, things could go different ways. Maybe they turn on each other. Maybe they live great lives. Maybe they go hungry. Maybe they don't prosper. But whatever happens doesn't negate that initial rebellion or, make it not just.
I think that's such sorry, Hassan, just jump in. I think it's such a interesting way to look at things, because just to again echo Hasnain's point, I mean, when it comes to the situation in Libya, I'm so grateful for you spelling it out for us, because honestly I had no idea. All we kind of knew was what we saw on the news, and just like I guess many communities do in this part of the world when they hear what's happening back in the East. But definitely when it comes to Iraq, I have, just like Hasnain, a lot of Iraqi friends, and one thing you said which was quite interesting, I feel like your experiences were mirrored with my Iraqi friends who, similar to you, left Iraq under persecution, came to America or the UK or Australia or Europe and Scandinavia, and had this mentality, oh, we're going to go back. We're just going to be here for a few decades and we're going to go back. And then post 2003, when they did go back, they found the country was destroyed both by Saddam and by the US invasion. People were different, infrastructure was, and they just couldn't live there anymore. So when it came to yourself and your family going back after the revolution, what kind of challenges, if any, did you face trying to, I guess, dare I use the word, reassimilate into what is essentially your homeland? Did you face any challenges going back, and did your relatives who had lived there before feel the country had changed? I mean, what were their kind of experiences there?
That's a really good question, especially because, the community that I grew up in didn't have any connection to Libya during exile. We weren't even allowed to call home. I had a family friend of mine who his grandfather died, and when his father in Kentucky called his brother back home to offer condolences, the brother was put in prison for 4 years, So part of it is funny because I realized that the way that we speak and the way we eat is very old school and traditional. So imagine like an American that was in a time capsule. He leaves and he comes back and he's like, what's going on, jive turkeys? And using like really old slang. So that part was cool. But, my initial visit there was short. And then I went a second time to live there for a while. And in those days, 2011, 2012, it was just extreme unity and brotherhood in the air and love and people hugging, and it was a really beautiful time. And challenges really started coming later when the rest of the world kind of had their eye on Libya and started trying to divide the pie and, enticing this person with money and weapons and that person. And eventually people who were trying to do stuff just based off goodwill started falling into that corruption, because you're seeing that I'm working on goodwill for so long and everybody around me is eating. And you just give in. You give in, and it becomes hopeless. And I think that was that's the point that Libya is in now. We had our first elections for some time, and hopefully headed in the right direction, inshallah. For me myself, in terms of assimilating, um, it's tough, man. I had this. In some ways, I was extremely welcomed, especially that first visit, and people were very grateful and surprised that we even came. I had
Mhm.
countless Libyan-American friends who had never been to Libya in their entire lives and moved there to live, immediately to a
Wow.
place they'd never been. And it was like a whole movement. It was like a reunion in Libya. I'd see all my friends back from the States. But I think one really tough part was that, from my perspective, we've worked actively to free Libya. We're more in tune with the history of Libya because they're not, Gaddafi's not teaching the history of anything negative that he's done. And there's 1 out of 5 people had the highest rate of intelligence in the world. The only countries that were in the same tier were Syria and North Korea. So 1 out of 5 people was worked for intelligence. Gaddafi's eyes and ears were everywhere. So you couldn't really speak openly about stuff. So I went back like, yo, we're sacrificing, we're trying to change things. I know people that had extremely good jobs here in the States that left their positions, that had highest security clearance in America, that had government contracts or were deans of schools or whatever, that quit, left everything to go home and try to build. It was kind of a rude awakening to realize that there were actually a lot of people in Libya that looked at us Americans, Libyan Americans, as people coming to get the money. They're
Wow.
coming to try to take over. They're trying to steal. And it was that was probably the hardest thing for me to come to terms with. And I still I'm in the process of kind of navigating that. And I've had people tell me like, listen, it's your land too, it's your home too, like you belong there and you're a part of it. But at the same time, I am wary of people's thoughts about what our intentions in coming home are.
One thing I've noticed about you, just by following you on social media and checking out your stuff, and one kind of aspect of you I find very inspiring is this an obvious drive that you have within you, of resistance and activism in the face of oppression and subjugation, be it with regards to the Palestinian cause or, you mentioned as well the Libyan cause as well. I guess what kind of inspired you to focus your artistic talent specifically on issues of resistance and activism? I know you mentioned that you took a break from music for a while. Were you always performing and rapping about issues of resistance and activism, and how do you kind of utilize your art? What inspires you to utilize your art to I guess shine a light on these things?
It's a tricky one because my biggest song before was a song called "Can't Take Our Freedom" that was raising awareness about what's going on in Libya, and I got really pigeonholed and as the like political rapper and doing less Rolling Stone and more NPR type interviews. But for me, it's not a conscious thing. That it's just real life. Like that's just what I see. I don't think I'm trying to, I don't want to try to chase every cause and make a song about
Right.
it that becomes really contrived. But these are natural things, man. These are natural things that we're exposed to in our experiences. And for me, my music is, I attempt at least to always be authentic and speak about things I see. So I happen to know about Libya. I happen to know about Palestine. I happen to know about things that are going on here in the United States, people of color. So I'm gonna speak on it. But I don't want to ever be one of these artists that thinks their music is so much more important than it is, and they're kind of talking down and preaching to people. It's not that at all. I just want to share experiences. And with the Palestine piece specifically, I just feel like now is a time where people's ears and eyes are open more so in the past. And it's a good time to capitalize and just show. A lot of times I'm just sharing. I'm not even offering opinions. I'm just showing visuals of what's going on there. People can make their own conclusions. And I think it's our duty. The way I was raised in my family, my father, like I said, was a political prisoner. He shared a jail cell with his father at one point. My uncle, who I was named after, and my other uncle, who my brother was named after, they were killed in an assassination attempt in 1984. And their bodies were found in a freezer in 2011 after the revolution. But when my father came here to the States, before he passed away, all his days working were as an editor for the opposition magazine. His whole life was about living on principles. He never really pursued any other jobs or high-paying positions. That's just the way we were raised, and I don't think that aspect will ever leave us.
How can we use art? I mean, I know you said obviously you don't want to pigeonhole yourself, but I think what is still inspiring is the fact that there are so many artists these days that are using the art to raise issues of awareness on issues like Palestine and even like, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, and just generally highlighting issues of importance. How can art be utilized, be it music or anything else? How can art be utilized to raise awareness on issues of injustice, and can it actually have a tangible impact? Or what's your thoughts on that?
I think art is the most palatable way for people to receive information. So everything we're seeing about Palestine, there's been academic journals about it. There's been, lectures at universities about it, but that's not really digestible for everyday people. They're not searching for it, and it's boring, to be frank. So, when your favorite artist is talking about something, that's at minimum going to make you think twice and look into it, and art, it can touch you on a deeper level. I think, art can help a person absorb information. It doesn't feel like information. They just feel closer. And at this point, I don't know how to measure the effect, but I do know that people speaking out creates more and more awareness. And with this, the recent siege on Gaza and in Palestine, we're seeing more and more people speak up. And a lot of that bravery comes from people at the top who are willing to put potential sponsorships in danger, potential connections in danger. And in Palestine specifically, it's a lot of the non-Muslims that are speaking up. And we see a lot of Muslim artists and Palestinian artists, unfortunately, who haven't drummed up the courage to take on, the industry and speak up. But I think at minimum, it's easy to break things down in a very palatable way. To give you an example, we can speak in all type of detail about the occupation and why it's wrong and legalities and international criminal court, but you can break things down very simply. Vic Mensa went to Palestine. He came back. He's on Trevor Noah. He just broke it down. He's like, he's not trying to get too complicated. He just says, I remember being in Palestine. The water was shut off. It wasn't working. We tried to go to the water reserves. We opened it up and we saw a bunch of worms in the water. It was really disgusting, and maggots. And at the same time, I'm looking across, we're on the rooftop where the water is stored. I'm looking across the wall and I'm seeing settlers and settlement villages, and they've got like water slides and they're doing their thing. And he's like, it just reminded me of Flint, Michigan, and the access that different types of people have to water and to clean, accessible water. And he just broke it down like that. Just gave like a little example of something he saw with his eyes. Wasn't too deep. You didn't have to go into the whole history. And it made a lot of sense. So I think, it's a responsibility for us. And I think it's just an easy way to reach people through arts, whether it's overtly through your music or just sharing something on social media or in an interview.
Since we're on the topic of art, Nouri, if you don't mind, and Kayem, if you don't mind, I want to shift into your actual art. I know you're currently in Chicago. You've been there for a current year. So I'm born and raised in New York. So, hip hop to me, and just like the rap game to me in general means something because, I was born and raised in New York where, I listened to a lot of hip hop and rap growing up, and it was kind of it became part of who I am. Being in Chicago, there's also, a lot of hip hop and rap from there as well. In your Al Jazeera interview that I watched, you mentioned how you're not like a religious rapper, or you're not one of those rappers who, like Islamically raps. I don't know what do you call that, right?
Yeah, like a Nasheed rapper.
Yeah, Nasheed rappers. Like you're not one of those. And you don't plan to be one of those, and you don't want to be one of those. And, being on the topic of your art and then being pigeonholed, and listening to Can't Take Our Freedom and listening to Hello Till I'm Gone, I realized that, okay, like you're using elements of, I guess, your identity as a Muslim, because, you do say la ilaha illallah in some verses, but you're not a Nasheed rapper. It's pretty clear in your artwork. So basically where I'm trying to navigate to is when you basically took a step into this career of rapping and hip hop artist, what were some of which rappers or hip hop artists were like the motivators for you that you connected to in regards to like, I'm basically doing poetry because that's what I think hip hop and rap is basically poetry moved into music. Were there any other artists that you felt because their artwork also correlated with the pain and the struggle that you felt and you wanted to talk about? Like for me, somebody that came to my mind automatically when I listened to your work was Lupe Fiasco. And then when I listened to like the way you rhyme and stuff like that, it was like a mix between Lupe. And I'm not trying to like compare you to anybody. It's just kind of what I'm hearing. But it was like, all right, this guy has like the flow of like Eminem mixed with the Lupe Fiasco, which makes you very unique, right? Because I can only say like, okay, what I know is Eminem because I grew up with him. What I know is Lupe Fiasco because I've heard him a lot. So I can only correlate with that. But for you yourself, like what were your inspirations?
Yeah, that's a good question. I like that you're noticing the rhyme patterns and stuff. I told y'all about Medlock Road, how it's not really a song.
Yeah, double entendres. I know it all, man.
Yeah. So Medlock Road is like that song. That's like me showing that, my skills like on the mic. But I'm gonna have to put out a lot of other songs which I've recorded that are more just kind of melodic and simple and built for streaming. But I'm excited for you to hear Medlock Road at least. But I grew up in a household. I had 3 uncles that lived in our house. So my mom's brothers, whenever they came of age, like 16, 18 overseas, they'd come and live with us. So I also listened to a lot of music just in the car with my uncles. So they, Tupac, Nas, and Lauryn Hill.
Nas, thank God he said
Nas. Yeah.
Hasnain's from Queens.
I'm from Queens, man.
He salutes that mural every day when he walks past it.
For real. My first passwords in life, like on a computer, I'd have like Nas's name or like Earl Shakur was an old password of mine. Yeah. Earl was like DMX's first name. So I used to listen to those guys at way too young to be listening to them. In modern day, like I like J. Cole. I listen to his new album.
Yeah, J. Cole's amazing.
Kendrick I definitely gravitate. Yeah. I'll be honest, man. Kendrick's somebody I really respect, and objectively, like I know he's talented. I just haven't been able to like connect. I might get hate for that, and I've tried so many times, but like I'm looking for it. When he drops, I'm listening to his album every time. I think I just like when he like raps. When Kendrick like raps, when he does a feature, that's like the peak Kendrick to me.
Yeah, because he has a unique flow, which you have to appreciate.
Yeah, for sure. But my inspirations weren't all just from music. And my father was very poetic. He was a poet, and he'd freestyle at the house and just rhyme about anything going on. So my father was an inspiration. People in my community that I grew up around, people like Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali, who, I spent my childhood in Kentucky. So Muhammad Ali came to the Masjid when we were younger. He was around and stuff. So just, a common thread is people who spoke out, I guess, and stood for something.
Yeah, so let me ask you this, because my next question goes into the more of the technicalities of your craft, because I'm a filmmaker, so I love talking about the technicalities, like what went behind your music videos. But before I get to that, if we go back to the beginning of this podcast, you mentioned the word home, and like for somebody like me, born and raised in New York, when I go back to Pakistan, which is very rarely, I feel like an outsider here in New York, even though I'm born and raised here. But I'm also an outsider in Pakistan, which is very blatant, right? Because I'm in like my Gucci sneakers and like jeans and stuff. And like, these guys, this guy's not from here, Yeah. But over here, like I'm a Pakistani Muslim in New York, right? So it's just like there's no sense of home for me, even though New York is my home, right? And then obviously in your documentary, sorry, because we're gonna get to that as well. In your Al Jazeera interview, when you showed that clip from your documentary when you went back to Libya, you made a little joke about like I don't belong here, but then I don't belong there either. And then like obviously everybody was like, no, you belong here. But deep down, like how does that make you feel? Like what is home to you? Like I know it's a very tough question because like it's a simple question, but they're always the toughest. But it's like, what is home to you? Like because home is not here. We all know that, but you're making a home here. But home is not there because you don't live there, but you want to go back and you want to help. So what is home to you? How do you balance that?
I'm smiling because I don't know if you watched. I had a little series about what is home. I don't know if you saw that. If you just coincidentally asking this, but of course we all face this. But I had a whole residency in Atlanta for a few weeks that was literally just dealt with this specific topic. And the way I've looked at it, I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky initially. That's where I spent my childhood. When I go back and visit Lexington, if it's a holiday and the people I grew up with, like I'm going to a wedding in Lexington this weekend, a lot of old friends and stuff are coming, it's going to feel like home. But when I just go there, I see my mom and my grandma, and I'm around, it just feels like a place I spent a lot of time in. You know, in Chicago, I've had my whole adult life in Chicago. It's cool. I have an affinity for it, but it doesn't quite feel like home. And I went to Libya. And when I got there, I felt like home. I felt this peace and serenity that I've never felt. But if I'm being really honest and transparent with myself, like they know as soon as you walk off the plane, you're not from there. Like you talk about your Gucci sneakers, like even if you just dressed exactly like you took like a random person that was on their way there that's from there and you dressed exactly the same, they're just going to know from the way you walk and carry yourself. You know what I mean? So I started realizing that maybe home for us isn't a physical place and it's a mental place. And for me, I feel at home depending on who I'm with. So the residency I did in Atlanta was called My Home is the People. So, you know, this last year, I actually left Chicago technically last summer, and I've just been perpetually traveling. So all the stuff, I've been spending time in between Senegal, Mexico, different states, different cities around the States. And I've had lots of times where I feel at home when I'm catching up with old friends and loved ones, the people that I feel I can be vulnerable with. And so for me, home is just a people, and that can change. If you go into your grandma's house, she could live here, she could live in Pakistan, but you're inside your grandma's house, you're just going to have this feeling of home, even if it's just a brand new house you never walked into before. So that's it for me. I think my home is my people.
Hasnain, before you jump back in, I love that perspective because I think that's a kind of question that all of us kind of grapple with as immigrants and descendants of immigrants. You know, for me personally, it was always a very strange situation because my grandparents came to the UK. My mum was born here. My dad came when he was like 3, so effectively born here. I grew up in a house where we spoke English and not Urdu. So you know, there was always those situations where I'd meet another Pakistani. He'd be like, "Oh, where are you from?" Pakistan. Oh, and then he starts speaking Urdu to me. I don't know what he's saying. And then he'll be like, "Oh, you know, how can you have that connection to Pakistan? You know, you've forgotten your roots." And there would always be that sense of judgmentalism. Hasnain there also shaking his head, you know, has those thoughts about me. But even like, you know, it's so strange because even though this is probably the place that I have the most connection to, I do feel kind of out of place here, you know, for all those reasons. Going back to Pakistan, I feel, you know, there's a kind of spiritual connection there and a sense of familiarity, even though I've barely been there, with the culture, with the language, with the tongue. But again, I don't feel home there. I come to America a lot, as Hasnain knows, have family there, travel. And I think what you said, which was beautiful, was that, you know, home is essentially, you know, just kind of paraphrasing what you said, but home is, I guess, a state of mind. And I think for me, I've kind of surrendered to the idea that I am a traveler, you know, both literally, physically, and metaphysically, and spiritually. So I kind of like go throughout life, you know, going to different places and just kind of like picking up lessons along the way, meeting different people, and accepting that I'm on this journey of life where, you know, you're never going to be tied down to one place or one state of mind. You know, you're continuously evolving as a person, just as you are traveling throughout this world that Allah has given us. So I think that's definitely a beautiful perspective. I wanted to throw this question in there, and I guess the answer is obviously kind of obvious because you are a rapper. But I just feel like this conversation is very interesting because we bring so many, you know, we've had so many wonderful conversations with Muslims on a vast spectrum on this podcast. And I think one thing, you know, I think all of us can kind of accept is that when it comes to music, Muslims have a very vast idea of how music fits into, I guess, their Islamic identity. On one side, you have Muslims who are like, absolutely all music is haram, we should not even touch it. On the other side, you have Muslims who actually use music to get closer to Allah. You know, I have, for example, in Sufi circles. So I guess when it comes to you specifically and your own kind of spiritual relationship with music, what's your perspective on music from, I guess, from an Islamic perspective, from your Islamic identity, and like, how do you use it as a way to connect with God, and what's the kind of like story there?
Yeah, sure. It's not obvious. It's a good question. And for me, I'll never be mad at somebody taking a safer opinion or a safer route. That's fine. I don't have a problem. There's people that say music is haram, and I wouldn't argue against them. I think if you do believe music is haram, there's a way that you should talk to or approach people. But for those people, I wouldn't even argue against them. Like that's cool. Take the safer route. That's not hurting you. But for me, music's just a medium. It's like TV. It's like books. It's like podcasts. It's just a medium, and what you do with it is what matters. So you can impact people positively, negatively, um, and that's really just the short of it. With me, with my music, the type of people that I've reached in my life, um, in my personal life, is similar to the way that I want to reach people in music. So, you guys mentioned earlier, I'm not a nasheed artist. I'm not really into like preaching, and that's fine. I'm not like hating on that lane. Like everybody has their path, but I'm not into like preaching to the choir. So in my real life, I had a lot of friends who were not Muslim that I grew up with. And, I had maybe out of 6 best friends growing up in Kentucky, like 5 of them took Shahada, and I've had maybe 12 or 13 overall in my life, become Muslim. And that's never through like preaching or telling them this, that. You just bring people into your world, you be open, come to, instead of explaining what a hijab is, they come to the house, they see how my mom is and how we interact, how other people interact, and you learn it and see it for what it is, and I run this club with my partner Alex on Clubhouse. It's called Muslims and Friends. I just found out recently, Clubhouse tweeted it, that's the largest faith-based club on Clubhouse, which is pretty cool. But even in that, I'm not the type of person that's gonna, half of the Quran and I'm gonna elevate you and help you complete the whole Quran. Like I don't have the Quran close to memorized, but I have been good at helping people who are either not Muslim or on the peripherals of Islam, not super comfortable with their identity or not feeling welcome. I'm helpful or I've had positive experiences in reaching those kind of people. So in my music, I don't ever want to be overtly Islamic, but I'm just sharing kind of my life and my experiences. And if it happens to connect with people, then that's a very dope extra.
I've been on quite a few of those sessions, and I just love how, I mean, again, I remember in the beginning when it was blowing up, and absolutely not surprising, I've seen so many, just logging onto those events, you see how many people are participating. Some good friends of mine as well have been on it and spoken to you guys as well. And I think what I love most about it is just that absolute sense of inclusivity that you guys have on that platform. Like there is no, I mean, I guess, no one claims to be judgmental, but I guess, once you enter that space, you can tell it's not a space for judgmentalism. It's a space where everyone's kind of welcomed and everyone's kind of appreciated and heard out. And I really appreciate you guys for creating that space. Just leading off the last question, what kind of, and I know you said obviously you're not a nasheed artist and you're not like but you are obviously a Muslim, right? So I guess what kind of challenges have you faced as a Muslim artist, if any?
And that's a really good question, and there's a lot. So many different ways. There's so many different ways I could answer this. I could answer it from the sense of, when it comes to media and publications, a lot of times they'll just always see you as the Muslim artist. And there's been times where I've turned down opportunities that were beneficial potentially or paid well, or would have got big press coverage because they just needed me to fill that role. Like, we're having this event, blah, blah, blah. Like, can you come be the Muslim artist? And I'm like, yo, you guys
felt that many times.
Yeah, like you guys throw ABC, like, why don't you invite me to those events? Like, I sell out my shows here. Like, I'm worthy of those events too. I don't want to come be the Muslim artist, and even in press, you find yourself just doing like NPR interviews perpetually. And I love NPR, no hate, but I'm just using them as like, an example. Like, I'm more than just a Muslim. And then, the other side of the coin, to be honest, man, is doing these shows. Like, our community has to really step up. I'm not a nasheed artist, so I don't do like MSAs and stuff, but I have done a lot of charity concerts and concerts with different organizations within our community. And man, I'm gonna just put it out there. Our community is really bad at like paying people on time or at all. or like living up to their sides of a contract. And, you know, I had this conversation with a friend of mine yesterday who's in a similar space, and we were just astonished at the number of bad experiences. So like, I would say one challenge, if I'm gonna keep it all the way real, since I'm talking to my Muslim brothers right now, is just being booked by Muslim organizations and some of the things you have to deal with. Like we really, it's embarrassing. We really have to step up our game, and that's why I
Yeah,
love
I
I
agree
love
with
being
that, man.
invited by people like you guys. You know,
Yeah.
you guys are
For sure,
great.
bro.
Have been above board, but it's like it's literally a challenge, man.
Does
And
it
I don't think that other
does
people deal with
so
that in other communities. So yeah.
does it put you off collaborating with
Oh
Muslim
yeah,
organizations?
for sure. I mean, I'll give a shout out. There's an organization called Gamma in Oakland, Gathering All Muslim Artists.
I've heard of them.
And yeah, they're in Oakland and they're in Detroit. And they hit me up once I got off the list and started performing and stuff again. They were one of the first organizations that hit me up. And I spoke to Abbas, the director, and I said, man, I'll be honest, like I'm really hesitant. I'm at a point in my career. I used to just jump at anything because I needed the money and I'll go get paid, you know, and work with different student organizations. And I learned like, don't work with certain student organizations. I was like, you know, I've just had a bad experience before. And it's not just about money. Sometimes they'll pay you right, but it's just not the right ambience that you want. And he was cool, man. He received all my talks. We had a really good long talk. And when they sent over the tech writer is like the things that you need as a performer. A lot of it might be equipment. A lot of it might be your request in the green room. I wrote in there, I just snuck it in as a joke that I need all yellow M&Ms. And when I got in the green room, they really had all yellow M&Ms for me. So they're on point. So I'm going to give a shout out to them. And I don't want to be all negative. Like there's a lot of art. There's a lot of groups that are doing really dope, amazing stuff. But just because I have the mic right now, if you're out there and you're part of a student group in college or you're part of a charity organization, like we can't have you booking us and then telling us you don't have money and then doing a 5-month tour with Maher Zain right after that. You know what I mean? Like y'all gotta be on point.
Damn, bro, fire.
You know, there's a really famous saying on this podcast that Hasnan always says, aka me, that it's always your own. It's always your own
always
people.
your own.
Yeah, for
It's
real.
always your own.
Yeah.
And then Nouri, before you jump in, I want to kind of move into the technicalities of the craft, if you don't mind.
Love that.
You know, like basically, I'm gonna get straight to the point. There's two questions I have, especially coming from a filmmaker like myself. You know, when you write your poetry or your rhymes down, they come from a place of resistance, of memory, of feeling, of emotion that you personally experienced, or you know somebody else experienced that you also connect with as well. And obviously, that's where you get your idea from. That's what makes your craft so beautiful that you do. How do you take that from emotion to mind to paper to basically recording to music video, right? Can you just take us through that process of how that all happens? Because I'm just really interested in to know, how do you take an idea and make it into a final product that you can post on Instagram, YouTube, get your stuff out there. You know, as a filmmaker, I hate the writing process, love the filmmaking process. But tell us about your process.
There's really no one way. I will say that I don't like physically write. I just listen to the beat and kind of, you could say freestyle, but to like be revising the freestyle over and over until I got it. I've never been somebody that like, maybe because I'm lazy, but I don't like to sit down and like physically write. So it'll always be vocal. Sometimes I have an idea for a song. And I work with a producer and we just build it up. Sometimes the producer is pitching something to me, but sometimes it's completely backwards. And you're talking about the visuals and how we transition it. I've just finished filming two music videos last month. And for those, the song was all ready and we had to talk with the director about what do we want to convey and how can we display this emotion. I don't like to be too on the nose in my music. I like to be subtle. So what are some ways we can show and bring out exactly what I'm doing? But sometimes it's completely backwards. And I'm working on something that's completely backwards now, which is I'm into this whole like post-apocalyptic genre of anything.
Love it.
I watch movies, shows, whatever. Like The Walking Dead got so stupid so many times, but I just stuck with it because I'm just enamored by the environment, you know. And I was in an Airbnb in Louisville last September, and I saw this car. I can't even explain it to you. It looks like something from Mad Max. It was like an old, just beat up car that had been like, you know, the roof is gone and it's got these like horn pipes. I don't even know how to explain it. Just think Mad Max. It just looked like some post-apocalyptic thing, but not polished, like old. And I could not get that car out of my mind. And I left Louisville. And in December, I did another 1 month stay in Louisville, Kentucky, in an Airbnb, a different one. And I just went driving to the old neighborhood that I had stayed at, just looking for the vehicle. And I found it like a creep. I just wrote a note and I was like, hey, I'm interested in using this for a video, blah, blah, blah. The guy hit me back 3 days later. And now we've created this whole concept for this post-apocalyptic music video short film that was based on me just seeing that car. And I hadn't even written the song yet. I'm now currently in the process of making the song, but I already know what the video looks like. The song won't be post-apocalyptic. Like I said, I don't like to be on the nose. It'll be subtle. It might be about starting fresh or when everything changed or something like that. But the visuals will be this post-apocalyptic short film. So that one we constructed completely backwards just because I saw the one thing that, you know, sparked the rest of the idea. Now we've got people working on costumes. We've got these little desolate areas that we scouted to film in. And working on a screenplay for it, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, I don't ever really pigeonhole myself into like one way of finishing the process.
So you have sorry, one sec. So you have control over most of the process, from writing to the beat to the music video to who you hire, or unless you have your own crew. So you have basically control over your own work. Correct?
Yeah, for sure. But that's not to say that I'm not physically making the beats myself, you know, or editing footage.
DJ Khaled.
You know, yeah. I've got people that are much, much more talented. I do have a team of people that I like to work with regularly, but I'll work with other people as well. But I think when you work with a producer who really understands you and your story, you guys can just create better art together and with some consistency in that.
Yeah, man. I know a really good producer. He goes by the name of Hasnain Ali, by the way.
As you can tell, Hasnain speaking about himself. He loves to.
Yeah, but do you really produce?
Yeah, I'm a filmmaker, so I produce. I mostly act.
He's talking about music producing, bro, not like
not music producing. I do filmmaking producing.
You had me thinking about beats, but yeah, filmmaking. Really,
no.
There could be a collab on there too.
Yeah, if you need a filmmaking producer for your music videos, you know,
I'm with it.
Winding down, and just kind of like jumping off that point. How much of yourself would you say you discover in writing? The reason I asked that, and just generally, like, what kind of relationship, how easy or difficult is it, do you find, to write? Because I think what I find with myself sometimes is that when writing poetry, one thing I've discovered about myself recently over the past few years is that it's such an extraneous process. You know, it's not like it's like, oh, I feel something, I feel happy, let me write down something that, you know, reflects the fact that I'm happy. It's more like you're digging deep down into your soul, pulling it out through your throat, and it's not an easy process. And I think one thing that I've definitely struggled with over the years is just trying to find the balance between, okay, how can I create content that, you know, I can put out there and people are gonna, you know, that might inspire people, move people, and, you know, how can I make it easy for me to not kill myself while doing it, because it is such a deep process where you have to kind of look inside yourself. So how much of yourself have you discovered, I guess is what I'm asking, in your craft and in writing?
You know, I'm a sucker for like cathartic situations, so I actually love that aspect. You know, I make music. Jerry Bruckheimer, who's a famous like movie producer, he had a statement once where he said, if I make a movie and for 2 hours people are distracted from all the problems in the world, I've been successful. I want to do the exact opposite. Like, I'm trying to, let's hold hands together and like walk through this. You know, my last show before COVID was called, or one of my last shows was called The Long Way Home, again about home. And it was a storytelling show. I had my band, I'd play songs in between and then just talk and go into detail about witnessing my father's death or his escape from prison or different things that happened to us, you know, being detained and taken to jail and pulled off planes and that kind of stuff. You know, I'm crying, the crowd is crying, and we just connect and build this beautiful moment together. So that aspect I actually love. But, you know, going back to your question earlier, this is actually a better answer. when you ask me what is one of the tough things about being a Muslim and doing this, honestly, the toughest thing is content wise, the balancing act of me wanting to portray myself as transparently as possible, but also feeling that responsibility of being a role model. And you know, when I was making music before under Khalid M, it was all authentic, but it was just a tiny sliver of who I was. And it took me that time of being away and being on the no-fly list and really trying to assess what kind of artist I wanted to be. And I had to come to a point where I was like, you know what? I don't have to be everybody's mom's favorite rapper. You know what I mean? And so I found myself getting boxed in with other artists, maybe with similar backgrounds, ethnically or whatever. And I was like, bro, my upbringing isn't like these guys. And they're good people. It's not against them, but like they grew up private school millionaires. We grew up super rough with a whole community of people who were, you know, dead or in jail or whatever. And so now I'm a lot more transparent with my experiences and with my faults and with my flaws, and sharing them. So I'm excited to really release the new music. And I think a lot of people who followed me before might have some jaw-dropping moments, but I think it's for the greater good, inshallah.
Yeah, I heard the quote recently, which is that art, you know, there's no point producing art if it's not riveting. And I think that is something that you kind of taken on board, and something I reflect on a lot. And I think that is essentially the purpose. And I think, you know, that is what we should kind of like be aiming toward. As a final question, something we ask all of our guests who come on this podcast. You know, this podcast is generally about exploring the relationship between one's spirituality, which is a very personal thing and differs from person to person, and their art and the artistic process. What relationship would you say your spirituality has with your art, and vice versa, and how do they complement each other?
Well, my spirituality is responsible for everything that comes out of me. You know what I mean? Everything, that all of my thoughts, all of my words, all of my engagements with humans. It's not something for us in Islam. It's not something we can separate. It's not an activity that we do each day of the week. You know, I have bars, like I have bars that people think like that's a dope line that's literally just taken from Quran or Hadith. You know what I mean? I had a line in Cloud Conversations like, God doesn't place a burden on us greater than we can bear. That's like straight out of the Quran. So it's not even my thinking. And people be like, oh, that's true. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's just stuff that we learned growing up, you know? So spirituality is going to always have an impact and its hand on my pulse, no matter what I'm doing. If it's art, if I'm trading crypto, whatever the hell I'm doing, you know, it's going to be impacted by that. I just try as best as possible to not be contrived and to just let, you know, my presence come out naturally. I don't ever want to go into a song saying this is going to be a song about, you know, this aspect of the deen or whatever. I'm just trying to share my thoughts and observations, and naturally, you know, those aspects of my life will seep out into the music, inshallah.
Profound. Kayem.
Well, I'm looking at Coinbase right now, and I see Bitcoin down, Ethereum down, everything's down right now, man. Damn.
Perfect time to buy.
Good time to buy.
Time to buy, man.
Kayem.
Good time to buy or a good time to look away. It's been a pleasure.
I don't know, man.
Kayem, appreciate you, bro. Thank you so much for your time. Before we let you go, if anyone wants to find your work or find you on social media, where can they go?
Everything is This Is Kayem. So at This Is Kayem. Instagram, I'm probably the most active right now. I got the website km.co, which isn't officially launched, and we're working on it, but that'll be out by July 16th, along with Medlock Road. So connect with me.
Appreciate you, brother. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it, man.
Take care.
Thanks, yo.